Hey everyone, this is Richard Borston. Hope you are all doing super great. This is one of my favorite topics to talk about, and it has to do with how to get things moving, how to get people moving through the copy super fast, and how to get them to be super excited about what you're doing. So, but before I get into that, before I talk about all those different those elements, what I want to talk with you about first is the mental approach to writing, and basically how I recommend that you go about getting your writing done. Now, I'm gonna move that over just a little there. Okay, so really there's a very mental approach to writing. In fact, one of the things that we do when we get into a writing mode is that we want to get ourselves excited about what we're going to be talking about. If we like just kind of approach it and kind of like, oh man, okay, here I go. Oh yeah, it's time for me to start writing. I guess I'll just kind of get into it. Then we're going to bring that into our writing, and we're going to have to come back into it when we're editing and really, really spruce it up. Probably have to completely rewrite it because it's just going to sound really drab and boring. But we don't want to do that, right? We want to have everything be exciting. And so in order to do that, in order to communicate that, we've got to get ourselves up and running. And so how do you do that? Well, look, one of the things that you got to do is you got to picture yourself using the product, picture yourself how people are going to be using the product. Think about how it's going to change their lives. Think about what it's going to do in their lives, how it's going to affect them. I mean, maybe it's this cool phone and you're like, man, dude, if this person could get their hands on this phone, it would do this in their lives. It would do this in their lives. It would do this in their lives. And it would, oh man, that's like amazing. I've got to get this in their hands. So think about that. Think about what it's like for them to have the product. If it's a service, the same thing, man, if they could just, I don't know, a cleaning service, if they could just have their house clean and just be able to relax, that would take so much pressure off them to save them hours of time. It would just, et cetera, et cetera. So you got to get yourself excited and think about what their lives are going to be like when they do what you're asking them to do, which is to buy this product or to click on this link or to do whatever it is that you're having them do. And think about one of my favorite guys. I just love this dude. I know he gets a bad rap now, and unfortunately he died very prematurely. But I just love Billy Mays. He's a very cool dude because I just find it amazing that he can move millions of dollars of products in just a couple minutes. So that guy knows how to sell stuff. That guy knows how to be excited about things. The same thing is with like the National Enquirer. So let's see here. I've got my National Enquirer here. What is it? What do National Enquirers do? They sell excitement, right? I mean, it's all about the excitement, the thrill. Streisand betrayed. It's about exciting. People want to have excitement in their lives are boring. They're drab. Bring that into their lives. So that's what you need to do when you are talking to them, when you're ready to start writing, when you're ready to start talking to them. You got to get yourself in that right place. You're going to have to figure out the different ways of doing that. Some people like to maybe exercise a little. Some people like to visualize like I suggested. But you got to make sure that your enthusiasm's there before you sit down and do that. Otherwise, it's not going to come through in an enthusiastic way. Okay, so the other thing that you need to understand is that when you're writing, when you're going through and you're writing your first draft and you're just getting into this mode and you're in this mode and you're just like, okay, I'm ready, I'm excited. Oh, this is going to be so great. And I start writing and you're like, wait, should it be a we or were or where or like, and you start getting hung up on all this like crap and you just stop. Don't do it. Don't do it. Because what we're doing right now, we're just getting it all out, getting all those emotions, those thoughts, those ideas. Think of this as a green light session. Think of it as like almost like a brainstorming set. You're just like, boom, you're pouring it out there. You've done all your work. You've done your logic flows. You know your market. You know what this is about. You know what we're going to talk about. Maybe you're not going to use the right word. That's okay. Look, here's a little secret that's true for every single person who writes. I'm telling you. Well, okay. Maybe there might be the few special ones. But here's the deal. You got to just accept this, and you just got to deal with it. Every first draft sucks. It sucks. It's like embarrassingly sucky. That's why like it's hard. Like when I'm a writer, I'm not an improviser, but like I'll sit down with someone, I'll be, well, okay, let me tweak this out a little. It's hard to tweak stuff out. It's hard to write stuff. It's hard to come up with something on the spot that's really good. Very few people can do it. If you can do it, great. But seriously, take that pressure off you. You don't need that kind of pressure. It's unnecessary. All you need to do is get it down. And then you can come back and then you're going to edit it. But what you're going to do right now is on your first blush is you're going to pour out all your heart and your ideas, and it's just a green light session. There's nothing off the table. Just let it rip. If you don't have a number, make a number up or put an XXXX. If you don't have a phone number, just make something up. If you don't know exactly how many years it's been doing, then make it up. Just make crap up that you don't necessarily know off the top of your head, and then just maybe highlight it or just tag it or do something that lets you know, hey, go back and make sure that this is cool, this is right, get the right number, get the right fact, get the right whatever. And so the reason why is you don't want to slow things down. You just want to keep them moving. Just keep them moving. Okay. So now last time I talked about how layering works, and actually before I talk about layering, I jumped ahead here for a second. What I want to do is tell you about editing. Editing is really where the magic happens. That is where all the magic happens. For most of us mere mortals, that's where we turn these really crappy first draft into a slightly better second draft, and then a mediocre third draft, and then a halfway decent fourth draft, and we just keep tweaking it out until we're at look, I'll often make 20 to 30 full revisions on stuff that I have time to do. So if I have time to do what I normally would like to do, which is give myself the space to be able to write stuff, then I will make anywhere between 20 and 30 full revisions where almost every word will be touched. And the reason why is because that's where all the magic happens. You get it all out there, and then you start shaping it and moving it and pushing it into a specific way of doing it. Okay. Now let's talk about layering. So I already explained to you some about how layering works. Just briefly though, really what layering is that we've already have it. It's almost done. We're getting to those final stages where you're in the short strokes of the game. I'm going to pull in as many metaphors as I can think of. And what you're doing now is you're polishing it. You're just tweaking it. You're moving it. You're throwing in this. It's like and what you're going to do now as you're layering is you're just putting in those final touches. Just putting in those last few little pieces that you need to really make it sing. Okay. So what we're going to do now is we're going to talk about how to do that in a few days, how to make it read super fast, and how to make it read how to connect with them emotionally. Okay. So the majority of the time we're going to talk about today is how to get them to read super fast, because there's some structural things that you got to understand. There are just some ways of phrasing that you got to understand. And so we're going to go through all of that. Okay. So first let's talk about how to make something what I call visually acceptable. What is something that's visually acceptable? So typically, if you think about a book, let me grab a book here. So never keep the Robert Collier book far away. So when you look at like a typical book, this is how it looks. Okay, you've got long paragraphs, big sections. It's not there's not a whole lot of, there's not necessarily a ton of space. I mean, this actually has pretty good margins in it, but you've got these long paragraphs, some maybe even big words. Okay, that's what we're used to looking at. And maybe even like in a newspaper, let's pick some, a high quality newspaper like the Enquirer, and so even here, we're used to longer sections, and this is what we've kind of gotten used to reading. But let me tell you something. That is not how you want to structure your copy if you're writing sales, if you're trying to get them to move quickly through the thing. Because look, part of the sale, believe it or not, part of the sale is how it's laid out, how it looks, what it does. Okay. And so if it looks like it's this ominous textbook kind of style, then they're not going to be interested. You're going to lose people just on the way that it's laid out, how it looks. Now, there are some places where you don't have the option of changing things up. And that would be if you've got, say, like a space ad, or you're on you've got a super tight area, and you just got to pack everything in. And you just got to do the best you can. But where you have the space, emails, VSLs, even sales letters, online sales letters are off. Anywhere where you have the space, then definitely take the space. Make the margins a little bigger so you've got more space around it. You want them to look at it and think, oh, I can read this. Oh, this is for me. I can do that. And that's what you want to look for. Okay. So one of the things, here's a little guideline for you as far as like paragraphs and stuff and how big. You generally don't want to have a paragraph more than about 5 lines. Notice I didn't say 5 sentences. I said 5 lines. So let me show you what that looks like. I'll grab my handy dandy Robert Collier book again. So you'll notice in here he's got your typical type of writing here. But see, look over here. This is actually a sales letter here. And can you see how he's broken it up? So it's like 2 lines, 4 lines, 4 lines, 2 lines, 4 lines, 3 lines. So that is how you want to structure it. You really don't want to have more than 5 lines. And if you can break it up, ideally, I like to have it be about 3 lines. But you just have to see how it kind of feels and how it kind of lays out. The other thing that you want to be in mind, particularly in the very first sentence of the piece below the headline and the subheadline, below that section in that very first copy your body, you want to have a very short sentence, ideally. Something that's capable of them just eye grabbing. Just the dog is red, sky is blue, horses are running. Something very simple, something that that they can grab quickly and just with a single look, just snatch it and plant it in their mind. If you can do that and get that, whatever it is, to move them to the next sentence, now you're on target. You want them to, this is part of the reason why I'm a fan of short headlines, because short headlines, they can instantly grab and take in and start processing. Where with long headlines, they got to like read this whole hunkin' thing. And so you're going to dissuade them visually by just the length of the headline. It's true with the length of the sentences as well. And particularly with the length of the very first sentence. If you can get them to just eye grab it, pull them in, move it along, you're on the right track. You're going to have a much better chance at getting them into the body of your copy and having them start running the gauntlet that you want them to run. Now, the truth is that the shorter the sentences, the better all the way around. So if you have super long sentences with commas and phrases and stuff, we're not writing Dostoevsky here. We're writing a sales page. We're writing sales copy. We want it to move. We want it to cruise along very quickly. And one of the ways to do that is to use short, snappy sentences that are flowing in a straight line. And we've talked a little about this already. You want things moving in a straight line. You know, noun, verb, direct object, subject, verb, direct object, all those things. Wasn't exactly a grammarian, but you get the idea. You want things moving in a clear, you don't want them jumping back. You don't want a bunch of commas and phrases and paragraphs and parentheses and all those things. You want these things, you want them to just be able to flow through it. Now, you generally don't want them thinking a whole lot. Let me explain what I mean by that. You don't want them thinking about what you're saying. You want them just absorbing what you're saying. You want them to just take it in. You don't want them having to process it. Okay. And so one of the things that we'll talk about in a little bit are some words that you want to avoid because of that. But you want them to simply just suck it in. So here's something that's interesting. Back in the days when the cigarette companies were getting all beat up and everyone was hating on them, they lost some lawsuits, they lost some whatever, and so they were forced to do some marketing campaigns against themselves, of all things. And I think it was to try to dissuade teenagers from smoking. So they had to create ads that the court had to approve, and whoever else had to approve, and they had to create these ads to convince teenagers to not smoke. So what did they do? Well, what they did was they took their ads, and their theme of the ad was think. They wanted you to think. Now, on paper, that sounds kind of cool. I mean, it makes sense, right? If people are thinking, then they're processing what it is that they need to do, and so that's a good thing, right? Well, no. When we're selling stuff, we don't want them thinking, and so it actually was a brilliant move on their part, because they basically kind of tricked everybody into saying, "Oh yeah, that's great. Okay, yeah, get them to think about how bad smoking is, and think about how it's gonna hurt them, and think about blah blah blah." And they're like, "Oh, that's perfect. Okay, good, man. We forced the cigarette companies to dissuade people from smoking. That's great. Big success." Let me tell you, it was a total failure. It was a total failure on their part. It was a total success on the cigarette company's part, because they played that game and these other people didn't even realize what was going on. So don't get them thinking. Don't tell them to think about this. Don't tell them to do. You don't want to use those you don't want them thinking about things. Okay. Let's talk about the words themselves. Use simple words. If you can use a simple word instead of a longer word, use the simpler word. In fact, I don't care what you're talking about. You should be able to hand what you've written to a 10-year-old and have them understand what it is that you're talking about. Have them be able to read through it and say, "Yeah, I get this. Yeah, this makes sense." If you've done that, then you're on the right track. Then you've written to that level. And look, this isn't because people are idiots. It's not because people are stupid. It's because people are giving you just a small portion of their intellectual abilities, because they've got 90% of it going off to other things: the kids, the boss, the work, the car, the health, the whatever. They're dealing with all this stuff, and they're able to give you just a little sliver, just a little piece of what you are asking them to, I guess what's available to you. So you need to write to a 10-year-old level so that that little piece that they're giving you, that little amount of cognitive ability that they're giving you is able to process and understand and be pulled into what you're talking about. All right, let's talk about subheadlines. So what is a subheadline? Let me find you a subheadline here. Okay, so a subheadline would be something like this. Okay, so this is a subheadline. So there's like copy, then it's like a subheadline, and then it goes copy, and then, you know, maybe is another subheadline. Okay, so that's what a subheadline is. Now, I know that the phrase is the same as when we have like a headline and then we've got this copy underneath it that maybe clarifies more, expands on what the headline was talking about. I know that we use the same term, but they're not the same thing. The subheadline in this case is it's a way of visually breaking up the copy. And ideally, you're going to do that within a max of 4 paragraphs into your copy. So you've got your headline, you've got your subheadline. Now you're starting to write your main copy here. So ideally, you're not going to go more than 4 paragraphs before you have a subheadline. Why? Because it starts visually breaking up. People are looking for indicators. They're looking for layouts. It's like a map. The subheadlines are like a map that lets them see, okay, bing, 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 bing. It also will speak to the skimmer. So the skimmers will hit those subheadlines and decide if they'll almost scan it and then say, well, okay, yeah, that's cool. That's cool. Okay, yeah, I guess I'll read this. So you got to write these headlines as though you're talking to people that aren't even reading the whole copy, but you also at the same time want to write it in a way that it makes sense for those that are reading the whole copy. So there's the challenge. But most importantly, what these do is they visually break it up. And they section it off so that it's like, again, another visually accessible way of like, okay, I don't have to read the whole thing. I just read this section. This interests me. I don't have to read the whole thing. I can just read this section that interests me. Now, here is something that is a little advanced, but it's super simple. As you're creating your body and your text and you're writing, try to shorten up how your different sections. So as you create your subheadlines, try to make them shorter, and the sections between the subheadlines, try to make them shorter and shorter. I mean, it's not like sentence, subheadline, within reason. But as you do that, especially for like longer pieces, particularly for longer pieces, the reason you want to do that is because it makes it feel like it's moving faster. Why? Well, if you've ever driven through the central part of California, then you know how mind-numbingly boring it is to drive through there. It's literally as though nothing's changing for hours. It's as though you're just driving still and just like you're in front of a movie screen and it's just everything's going by the same pace. Everything's coming by. It's like the lines are coming by. There's not even, I mean, there are some billboards. There's not even really billboards going by. It's like, didn't I just see that cow? Was not the same cow I just saw? What about that? That looks the same as the last one. It's like 3 hours and you're still driving by the same cow. And you're driving. It feels super boring. You could do that for 8 hours going through California. Now, on the other side of things, you could drive for 8 hours and you can, let's say like you start in a dense forest for the first hour. And then the second hour, you're driving through swampland. And then the next hour, you're driving through the desert. And then the next hour, you're driving through along the coastline. And so with each hour that passes, you're changing and there's curves and you're on a straight roads and then you're on a super curvy, twisty road. And then you're on these sweeping curvy roads. And you're on this rolling up and down section and it just breaks it up. Well, as you do that, it feels shorter. That the 8 hours are going to pass by way faster than 8 hours trudging on the road with nothing changing. And that's what the breaking up these sections and moving things along and taking them in new directions is really useful to do when it comes to these subheadlines. So it gets them feeling like they're moving somewhere. this is really that visual, those visual guidelines that I would recommend that you do. So just to sum it up real quick here. So visually speaking, you want to have larger margins. Try to create the more white space. Do that by breaking it up, not having more than 5 lines. You want to use shorter sentences. You want to break them up and have sentences that have paragraphs that maybe are 1 line, 2 lines, 3 lines. You want to use shorter sentences, use smaller words. Make it look visually accessible in their in the copy, and then also use those subheadlines in a smart way so that it breaks it up and makes it feel like it's moving. So that's just structurally how you want to have it. But what about words? What about phrases? What about the things you actually say? What about those things? Well, let's talk about that. So one of the ways that you're going to keep things moving and get them racing through is by using words like and because and so. So you can link paragraphs together. You could say, and it does this, and it does this, and when you go to the store, you're going to be able to do this. Or you could do like because you've always been like this, and because it's like this, and because you've never been able to do blah blah blah. So you can link them, or so so the next time that you do this, and so the next time you do this, so the next. You can link them together, and you can use it as a pattern to do that. Now, generally speaking, you don't want to do that more than 3 times, but it can be a powerful way to continue a thought and to make it feel linked, and as though you're building an argument, even if you aren't really building an argument. So those will help you continue a thought and kind of keep you moving along. There's another way of getting them to want to continue to read and to keep them moving, and that's by not finishing a sentence. And by the way, this is a great trick for people who are using direct mail pieces, and you want to get them to turn the page, is put a sentence in the middle and don't end the sentence. Now, I know that Word and some of the other software programs, they don't like that. It's not proper. And so they'll swing the whole hunkin' paragraph over, or they'll swing the whole sentence around, and instead of just letting it be cut in half. Try to avoid that. There's actually ways of configuring it so that it doesn't do that. But what you want to do is, if it says so I grabbed ... and then they have to turn the page to figure out what it was that they grabbed. Or this phone has never ... Never what? They want to know. Our brains want to complete things. They want to wrap things up. So much of our lives are revolve around completion, right? An untimely death, unsaid word, all those things. Our brains don't like things being unfinished. They don't like. It's hard to handle. It's hard for our brains to handle. We don't like it. So another way that you can keep them moving and pulling them along is by using an ellipsis. And look, that's kind of cheating. Really, you should be able to write better than that, but it is something that works, and I use it all the time because I like cheating. So what it does, though, is it indicates to your brain that you're not done. So like I said, you can say like, so I grabbed ... or even you can even use it in a complete sentence. So you could say something like, and the dog ran to the house ... And it just indicates to the brains that something's not complete about it. You need to finish it up. Another way to do it is to use psychological phrases, and this is more advanced and it requires more diligence, but it's also a lot more powerful. So you could say something like, so I grabbed the ball and threw it as hard as I could toward the window, period. Now, when I create that kind of scenario, I'm putting a picture in your mind of a ball flying towards a window. And if I've done my job well, it's going to make you want to find out, well, what happens next? As the ball's flying towards the window, what happens? What do you do? What is the ball going to break the window? Is it going to bounce off the window? Is someone going to throw the window up at the last second and it's just going to come flying into the room? Is someone going to intercept it along the way to the window? What is going to happen? And so your brain's kind of left wondering, and it's going to pull it. I'm using a psychological element to pull them along into the next sentence. Another way to do it would be to say something like, of course, there's even a more important reason. Okay, well, what is it? I want to know. I'm using curiosity. I'm using the interest of like, well, what is the other important reason? Okay, so using psychological phrases are really important too. Now, in that same idea, you also can use that idea to move them through an entire sentence. Okay, so here, let me read a sentence to you, and then I'll kind of break it down for you. And yet, few investors realize it's not only easy to outperform these pros, it only takes 5 minutes a day. Okay, so let's take that sentence for a minute. And yet indicates I've got something more to say. Okay, few investors realize what? What do they realize? It's not only easy. Okay, when I say it's not only easy, I'm saying that's not the only thing. There's actually more to it. So what's not only easy? Well, it's not only easy to outperform these pros. Well, what else? I knew that was only part of it. It only takes 5 minutes a day. So within that sentence, I'm using phrases and ideas that are pulling them along and getting them to move through the sentence and read it. Now, if you can start stacking those sentences and then having the sentences lead into other sentences and stuff, this is how you get them to just, it's like they didn't even want to. It's like they just kind of picked this up and started reading it, and before they knew it, they're like, they couldn't freaking put the thing down, but they don't really know why. This is some of that element of how you do that. Is you're using phrases and psychological triggers to make them want to continue to move along. Now, another way to do it is to tell a story. And now, there's a warning, though, I have for you about stories. I'll tell you that in a minute. But when you're telling stories, they're very powerful. We all know that people love stories. They connect to it. The Bible's full of stories. It's one of the most read books ever written. It probably is the most read book ever written. People connect to stories. It's how God created us. So people want to hear the end of a story. So if you start them into a story, they're probably going to finish it if you're doing a halfway decent job of telling them the story. My wife, we love watching movies, and we'll sometimes we'll be a little risky. Hey, I haven't heard of this movie, but it looks kind of cool. I'm not really sure if it's for me, but let's check it out. So we'll start watching it. Me, I'm 5-10 minutes in. I'm like, oh, this sucks. Let's bail. It's very hard for my wife. She's like, oh well, I don't know. Let's just watch. Let's just keep watching it. And then we're 15, then we're 30 minutes in. It's still sucking. Oh well, we're already watching this much. She has a hard time leaving the story unfinished. She just, at this point, even though she admits, like, yeah, not such a good movie, not such a good story, she still just wants to finish the story. And that's how powerful it is. So, but here's my warning for you. When you use a story, you make sure you pre-sell the story. Don't think, oh, people love stories. They're just wired that way. So I'm going to write a story. And so then you just start writing a story, and you just know it's going to work because that's what happens. People like to read stories, and that's what we know. That's not true. You got to pitch them on why they should listen to the story. So pre-sell the story, give them a reason for why the story is valuable, and then they'll want to listen. Then they'll want to go through it, and you can pull them through, and you can get them into it. So you want to give them a compelling benefit and use the story to make that benefit come to life. Okay. Now, Here's something that's super important, and this can throw the brakes on even the fastest copy in a heartbeat. And that's when you start a fight with someone. Why would you start a fight with somebody? That seems a little weird. I'm trying to sell them something, right? People do it all the time. And they start fights with people by using typically 3 words. They use the word always, they use the word never, and they use the word all. These are fighting words. Let me assure you, my friends, these are fighting words. And they're fighting words because people will immediately start arguing with you. If you say the government's always out to grab your money, well, I actually remember when they helped save my life one day. What do you mean? They'll start arguing with you in their minds. Think about it. If you're married, you never take out the trash. I just did it yesterday. What are you talking about? All stockbrokers are scam artists. My dad's a stockbroker. He's actually a pretty good guy. You use those types of words and you're ready for a fight. You're going to start a fight, and let me tell you something. When you deal with them, boom, game's over. They ain't listening to you anymore. They don't care what you got to say. They are now having a whole other conversation. In fact, their eyes may be moving. They may be turning the page. I mean, if you were to had a camera on them, they may be turning the pages. They're not even reading the words anymore. Why? Because they're still having this argument with you about always. Well, what do you mean always? That's not true. Always. That's, or never. What do you mean? So just avoid that whole fight. Instead, use often or many or some. And it just removes the whole argument. In fact, what it does is it even strengthens your case, because people will be like, oh, okay, this guy's being reasonable. It's weird, I know. But it's I'm telling you, it will save you a lot of headache, and it'll get them further in your copy if you don't use the always, never, and all. So say most brokers say most brokers, say some, say I've seen many brokers that have struggled with this over their lifetime. If I say all brokers struggle with this, they'll be like, hey, I'm a broker. I don't struggle with this. So just use those words that give them an out. It could be 99.99%, but they can say, oh, okay, yeah, that 0.01. No. That's what you need. You need to give them that out to say, oh, those other guys. Yeah, those other guys are doing that. Oh, yeah, not my dad, but yeah, there probably are some bad guys out there that are brokers or whatever. Okay, so give them that out and let them have that angle so that they're not having to argue with you, and just avoid the fight. Don't fight with them. Okay, here's another thing. Use transitional phrases. So like it gets even better, or it's no secret that, or mark my words, or don't be fooled, and then go on to say, don't be fooled by those bureaucrats that are trying to take your money without giving you anything in return. So what you're saying is don't be fooled. Well, gee, I don't want to be fooled. So is some of those transitional phrases. It can help smooth things out sometimes if things aren't real or maybe a little awkward. But honestly, you should be writing in a way that everything's kind of leading into the next thing. So you don't want to have to put in these kind of phrases to smooth out an awkward or clunky transition. But you really want to use these phrases to keep continuing to pull them along, kind of like I talked about before. Now, let me talk about cliches, because I know cliches get a bad rap, but they actually have a really important part in what we do. And the reason why is because, remember what I said, we don't want people thinking, we want them absorbing. And cliches allow us to do that. They allow us to communicate a whole ton of information in a very short phrase. So if I say, hey, it's all downhill from here, you know what I mean. I don't need to say anything else. I may expand on it a little and describe what's going downhill. In fact, I used that phrase on a thing once where I was talking about our immune systems, and how at age 1, you have the peak of your immune system. This is kind of interesting. So our immune systems as human beings peak at age 1. That's like the most robust immune system that we're going to have ever. And from there, it's all downhill. So I said something like, hey, it's all downhill from age 1 for your immune system or something. That's all I needed to communicate. And then I kind of clarified. I mean, I talked a little more about, I basically said what I just said about how our immune systems peak and blah, blah, blah. But it's a way of communicating something. You just get it right away. Hey, if I say you're going to dig yourself into a hole, you get what I'm saying. If I say a diamond in the rough, the early bird gets the worm, or it's worth the king's ransom. If I say there's no need to jump the gun, or if I say, hey, these bureaucrats don't have a leg to stand on, I'm communicating a whole bunch of things without having to say a whole bunch of things. And that's very valuable in writing. And it also just lets you absorb it. You're like, oh man, yeah, okay. Yeah. They don't really have the grounds to do this, and blah, 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 blah. So use cliches. They're super important and they're very valuable, and feel free to cliche up. Get your cliche on and just work it. So think of it like an accessory. For you women, just accessorize. For you men, just slap it on and get crazy, because the cliches are super, super useful, very important. And if you're not using them, you're not selling. I'm just telling you. You ain't using cliches, you ain't selling what you could be selling. The other thing I'll tell you is to use everyday words. And this is kind of the last thought I have about just moving through and just getting them to flow as quickly as possible through your copy, is to use everyday words that you would use when you're talking with a friend. Don't say the subordinate distractions of the we joked around. If you recall, in Pirates of the Caribbean, he says, well, I am disinclined to acquiesce to your request. And she kind of looks at him puzzled. And he says, the answer is no. And that's the thing, is that when we're talking with friends, we would say no. When for some reason, sometimes when we're writing stuff, we say, I'm disinclined to acquiesce to your request. And that's the difference, is that we need to just talk and use conversational tones, use conversational words, and just let it flow. Don't talk about the strategic integration of our orientation documents, or it will allow you to co-possess the intricacies of the diplomatic bubble. It's like, what are you talking about? Just tell me that you're going to give me the piece of paper and you'll get it over to me next week. And then we're done, right? So make sure you don't get caught up in that. One of the easiest places to get caught up in that is when you're like really in that important part where you're like, what's called a turn, where you're like kind of warming them up, and then you're turning them and starting to roll them into the pitch. You're like, okay. It's like, you could almost pick it out, because all of a sudden, like, it's like short paragraphs, and all of a sudden it's like super long, and like all these like big long words, and then like there's like 5-6 lines of a paragraph, and you're like trying to, because you want them to accurately understand what it is that you're prescribing. But again, we're not getting them to understand. We just want them to suck it in. And they do that with basic words, simple words. Okay, so that's what I got for you on that part. Let me go back and just hit that real quick. So in the writing part, you want to use phrases that can continue a thought. So like and, because, or so. You want to use phrases that they keep them reading. So like, you can do that by not finishing a sentence. You could do that by using ellipses. You can use psychological phrasings. You can move them, that you can try to get them to move through the entire sentence by linking psychological phrasings together. You can use stories, but make sure you give them a reason to read the story. What you want to avoid is starting a fight with them. So you don't want to use always, never, and all, or any variations thereof. Use transitional phrases, and remember that cliches are your friend. And then finally, use those everyday words. Okay, so let's move on to this final section. it seems like it'd be like even harder to do with like bringing in emotion into stuff, but it's actually pretty straightforward. So I'm going to cover this quickly, and it's actually pretty simple. Now, here's the thing: is that these are actually some of the emotional layer is actually often one of the last things I'll layer in. I'll just go through and I'll comb through and I'll just be super diligent. Instead of reading the word get, I'll say score. Or if instead of saying read, I'll say pour over, or scoured. I'll use words that I'm trying to create. Remember, we talked about theater of the mind. I'm trying to create the theater of the mind. I'm trying to create that image in their mind, whether it's by using different stuff. It doesn't really. It's not tied into one particular thing, but I'm going through and I'm basically where can I add more emotion? Where can I create more word pictures? Where can I create more theater of the mind? Where can I elicit feelings from them? And so I'm really tenacious, and I'll go through and I'll write that stuff. Okay. Now, here's the thing: is that you want to use the feeling that you want them to have. So, for instance, you want to have negative feelings towards their current state. You want to have negative feelings towards other options. So what does that mean? So negative feelings toward their current state. Right now they're drudging in or struggling with their debt, right? So they're struggling. You want to use negative words. You want to use negative phrases, negative ideas. So if you're pitching a proposal, for instance, and you put out the thing, we'll create this thing, and you will pay for all the costs related to advertising. Now you say, well, I don't want to use costs. Maybe I should use the word investment. Well, if your other option is for them, well, we'll cover all the costs of advertising, and you don't need to. Now, see, we're framing advertising in a negative way. It's a cost. It's an expense. You don't even get anything out of it. So you might want to frame it in that way. Frame that option in that way, because you want them to pick the one where you're covering the costs, because it creates a better deal and you have more control, whatever your case may be. Then what you want to do is also point negative towards the other options. As you slug away with that old car, or the car rattles and pings and blah blah blah. So you'll plant negative feelings on other things, negative feelings on the current state. You'll put positive feelings towards their future, and positive feelings towards your solution. So you use positive words in the future, positive words in towards your solution. Okay, so here's kind of some examples here. So like instead of saying something like mutual fund managers spend their day in and day out picking the right investments. You might say something like mutual fund investors spend their day agonizing over which investment to pick. It immediately creates, and is spending day in and day out picking the right stock. There's no emotional tie to that. When I put they spend their day agonizing over which investment to pick, now you get this picture in your mind. It's like, oh man, it's like, what are we gonna do? Is this one? Is it this one? And you start putting a picture into play. Okay, so that's how you would say take something that you had written and start layering an emotion into it. You look at it and say, how can I say this differently with more emotion? So here's an example. I'm gonna read this to you. This is a little piece that was written. The headline was "The Chilling Truth About Trading Newsletters." There's a dangerous fact about most trading newsletters, a fact enthusiastic investors often overlook, ending in disastrous results. The deceptive secret easily hooks even serious traders. Still, this hidden truth remains. Most trading gurus fill their newsletters with shaky opinion after shaky opinion. Nothing's proven. So you never know if their flimsy theories work in the real market unless you're willing to throw your money into the wind and hope it all lands back in your pocket. So that is a way. So let's take a look at this real quick. The chilling truth. It's almost like, oh, you're gonna almost get the chills when you discover this. The chilling truth about trading. There's a dangerous fact. Okay, there's enthusiastic investors overlook, ending in disastrous results. Right. So we're creating this whole negative feeling of like what's happening and how this deceptive secret, it fools even the serious traders. Then we talk about the hidden truth remains. Most gurus fill it with shaky opinion after shaky opinion. Nothing's proven, and they're flimsy theories, and you're throwing money into the wind, hoping it all out. So now, first parts. So here's the thing: is that you can add in these emotions, and you can cast these negative dispersions upon what's going on, and then you can move them towards the positive. Now, don't be thrown off. It doesn't always have to be an adjective. It can be a phrase. It can be a verb, like agonizing, right? The other thing is that it can be like a word picture, right? So I also gave you that picture of throwing money into the wind and hoping it all lands in your pocket. There's a picture there that's very powerful that you're like, that's like a hopeless endeavor, right? I'm creating this hopeless endeavor in their mind so that it doesn't seem possible. It seems like, hey man, that's a waste of my time. Okay, so that's really how you'll add emotion into your copy. The important thing, though, the very important thing to do is to not draw attention to what you're doing. So you may argue whether or not I drew attention to how I wrote that last little piece in there that I just read to you. But if it's done well, I'd have to point it out to you for you to realize what was going on. Now, when we're talking about negative stuff, it's a little easier to pop out. When I was talking about positive stuff, it's even harder to pick up if you do it right. So that's really what you want to do. You want to lace it in there in a way that you can't see it. It's almost transparent. You don't want them noticing that you're doing it. Okay. So that's what I got for you guys. That's the momentum. That's the emotions. Let me just jump right back over the emotions real quick. So you really you're creating that theater in the mind. You're going to cast negative thoughts towards their current state or options. You're going to cast positive thoughts towards the future in your solution. You're going to use emotional words, and you're going to just be diligent and go through and just check think about every single word. What's another way I can say find? Can I use the word discover? Just go through and think about what's another way I could say this that would create a picture, would create an emotion, would create a feeling. So do all that. And that's really what you want to do, but you don't want to ultimately draw attention. Okay, so here's the thing. Here's your assignment. Here's what I want you to do. Go through your advertisements that you're working on and look for those opportunities to create a more visually accessible layout. Think about speeding up your sentences by keeping them short and moving fast, by putting in those connecting transitions and using those psychological ideas that make them really want to read more. And then finally, putting in that layer of emotions into the piece that really make it come alive. So if you don't have an advertisement that you're working on right now, I want you to go find an advertisement and say, how can I make this better? How could I have sped this up? How could I have improved this? Because remember what I said, the magic is in the editing. The magic is in the editing. I'm going to say it one more time. The magic is in the editing. So if you get really good at editing, then really all you got to do is get good at getting stuff down, and then you can start editing and make it magic. Okay, so that's what I got for you guys. Go out and kill it and have some fun.